It's Michelle Cordero here with ASAS Massage Education, coming live again, our Friday afternoon live chats from Facebook and YouTube. So glad to have you here today. I see a bunch of people joining up on our live, joining us live right now. Happy to see you, and those catching us on the replay. Glad you could find us and get to enjoy this conversation. Today's guest is Ruth Werner. She is an educator, author, artist, self-described pathology queen, which I think we can all agree to that. I asked her to come on the show today and chat a little bit about how she became the Path Queen and that journey to now get to her currently 7th edition of the Massage Therapist Guide to Pathology, starting over 20 years ago, that whole journey. So we're going to find out all of that out today and have a little fun today. So without further ado, let's bring on Ruth and say hello.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out today. We're going to have some fun.
We are going to have some fun.
The cool people are here.
We are the cool people, and we already had a little chit chat and some laughs already. So I cannot even wait for the rest of the things to go. So, Ruth, if you wouldn't mind, I know a lot of people in the massage field are well aware who you are because of your textbook and because of what you've brought into the field of pathology and contraindications for massage therapy. But would you mind sharing a little bit of how you even got into the massage field to begin with?
Sure. I'm a theater major. That's how I got into
that makes the transition perfectly.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
an Asian studies major. I don't know how I got here either.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I graduated from a really lovely little liberal arts college in Portland called Reed College. And I moved to Seattle thinking I was going to do a bunch of theater, which in fact I did, except that I didn't get paid for it. And I, was working little jobs, and I was a nanny for a young family, and I'm still in touch with them now. As sitting at their house one afternoon, and I was reading the Seattle Weekly, which is a weekly paper, and on the very back page, where the tiny little classified ads are, there's a little square that said, "Go to massage school, call this person," and I still remember the phone number. I mean, that's how kaboom, that's what it was like. Yeah. And it was sort of obvious. Oh yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was mainly because I wasn't carving out a paying life in theater. I looked at grad school in theater. It wasn't a good match for me. And this would have been 1983. And so computers were still kind of mysterious. The people I knew who were into computers were people I didn't want to be. Right. And and I had no talent for working in restaurants. So really, I mean, that was it. I mean, for someone who was my age, who didn't have a profession to go into, it was computers or restaurants, and neither one of those looked right for me. So you go to massage school. Yeah. And at that time it was, of course. At that time, of course, it was completely different. It was 125 hours and it cost, I think it was $350. And we met in different places every week because there wasn't a settled building, and we carried our massage tables with us. I still have my first massage table. Wow. It was homemade.
Oh my gosh.
It was homemade out of like 3/4 inch plywood and a piano hinge. It is now my sewing table. So
nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it cost me $50 and 5 massages. And I mean, it's just, we were making it up as we went along, largely in those days. It was before there was an education requirement in Washington State, although they did have what was considered a pretty rigorous test. There was a state test that you had to take to get your license. But while I was in school, once again, theater major, no science, but I really sort of fell in love with the anatomy. And I think I went through 3 anatomy coloring books because I just couldn't get enough of that stuff. Right. And we had a couple of people join the class after me, and they were having a hard time getting caught up. And so my teacher asked me if I would work with them just to kind of get, do a little tutorial with them and get them caught up. And then more of that kind of opportunity began to arise. Even before I finished school. Once I did finish school, the program had grown to the point where he needed more help. And so as that school grew, and this is the Brian Edding School of Massage, I became, a tutor, an assistant teacher, a full teacher, eventually actually became the assistant director of the school, and saw that really grow and become something really, really, truly beautiful, in that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Had like your own building and everything too at that point?
We rented different places, but they were beautiful, beautiful. I mean, we had a place over the Shoal Bay, and we had a place on Lake Washington. It was really lovely, except hard to teach when the seaplanes are landing, like right behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And then, but then, in the meantime, I had gotten married. I had a couple of babies. My husband had a jobbity job. And so when he was transferred, you follow the health insurance.
Right.
And so I had to leave, Seattle. I had to leave the school. And that's when Brian, my boss, gave me a little computer, a little Mac Classic 2, because they were upgrading. And so he had, he had this thing for me, and he said at my going away party, he said, you keep telling us we don't have enough information about contraindications, which was in fact a drum I had been beating hard.
Right.
That we are not prepared. I mean, we were training people. I hate that word training. We were educating people to work with healthy clients, right? And people who had a little money, and maybe a musculoskeletal twinge. We weren't we weren't educating people to work with clients who have diabetes, or clients who have cancer, or clients who have chronic conditions. And yet those people were seeking massage. Right. So I got very insistent that we weren't getting enough information on that. So when I left the school with my kids, who were at that time like almost 5 and almost 3, he said, "You're going to be an at-home mom now. You're going to have all this time on your
all that free time with stay-at-home moms." So spoken rights would never have been a stay-at-home mom person.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, you learn that's one of those little bits of information. But he gave me this computer. He said, "Write us a document. Write us something we can use about contraindications."
Yeah.
And this was before everybody had internet. We actually had to go to like books for this.
Like an actual library.
The library and the AMA Family Medical Guide. And we moved to a suburb of Washington, D.C. So the Washington Post had wonderful health sections every week. And, these are the kinds of resources that informed the first handout that I wrote for that school. It took a year. And at the end of that time, I thought maybe this might find a broader audience. And so I called him and I said, I think maybe some other people might be interested in this. How would it be if I looked for a publisher? And he was like, yeah, whatever. Good luck with that. So I did. I mean, he wasn't that dismissive, but he was supportive of me. He was supportive of me, looking for a broader audience.
Well, no one had ever done this at this point.
Exactly.
So it's hard to say like it was going to be successful.
Exactly. Well, and there weren't really any massage textbooks to speak of.
Right.
So I called, because we were using in our massage school, we were using books that were not written for massage therapists. We were using sort of a general Abmp book and a general anatomy book. And I called a friend of mine, Dr. Ben Benjamin, who had at that time 4 books on the market, and he had been a mentor to me. So I said, Ben, I have this manuscript and I don't really know what to do with it. What do you suggest? And he said, well, I just got this letter from this publisher in Baltimore. So I'm 40 miles away.
Oh, nice. That job transfer was a reason for that.
That's right. Oh, yeah. And he said, they want to open a whole new department in alternative and complementary medicine, and they're looking for new manuscripts. So here, call this lady. And again, I don't remember the phone number this time, but I still remember her name.
Yeah.
And it turned out that all the books I had in my library from Brian's school were books published by this publisher. Huh. And so that was a happy coincidence.
Yeah.
And so we had a long talk about what massage therapists need and, things they might think about developing for that market. And she guided me through the process of writing a book proposal. And I used that thing that I had written for Brian as part of that proposal. And it took a really long time.
Yeah.
It took like 3 years to get to a contract and another few years after that to get to the first box. I ended up, so I had that first phone call probably in 1993 ish. It might have been 92. And I opened the very first box of books in October of 1998.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so I'm just thinking along by the information that you put together in 93 to 98, what the difference, you already had to update the version of the textbook, I would assume.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, well, edition 1's out the door now. So there's that.
Well, and I mean, there was so little, comparatively speaking, there was so little available on it because this was, although I did finally have internet, it was pre-Google.
Yeah.
And so there are all these different search engines. So I'd have to search my terms on all these different search engines to make sure I was getting, everything that was available. And there wasn't much. And there was certainly nothing specific to massage.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to, I was pretty much on my own. I used the work I had done originally to create some parameters. Had a wonderful developmental editor. But I was the one who was responsible for choosing, well, all right, what conditions are we going to include and how are we going to arrange them? And my writing coach, my editor, worked with me on creating the format that I still use about definition and who gets it and how to talk about the pathophysiology. All those sort of style things were things that I developed in that first edition with a lot of support. Right. And they made the book really popular. And when it came out in 1998, that was also through no work of my own, the same time that NCB said, yeah, okay, if you want to be a registered school, you have to offer a minimum of 40 hours of pathology. And there was nothing. I mean, there were really, there was almost nothing available for people to use. And so my book, which was beautifully produced, Lippincott, when I began, they were Williams and Wilkins, and then it became Lippincott, Williams and Wilkins. They produce a gorgeous book. They have wonderful designers. And so I had a beautiful product at exactly the right moment. And that really, that really led to the book really, getting a lot of traction. And
So I'm really curious because I remember I mentioned that a couple of times I've been in your classes before. You've come to present for us here in Arizona, and I've been to some of the AMTA conventions where I've been in your class with the 5,000 people inside and my little self in there. But I remember at one point in one of the classes you had said, I did all that hard work so you guys didn't have to. And I remember just that, something that stuck in my brain. Also with what I mentioned earlier, how you told us to all burn all our old editions of the book.
Well, all right. I'm going to talk about that. But okay.
It was a more so there's things that are updated, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But when there isn't anatomy built for massage therapist books and there isn't a Google, can I massage someone with diabetes? How do you take that information that's out there that isn't related to massage and make it related to massage?
What a fabulous question. So really what it boils down to is, and I bet you could do this, if you sat down at a desk and you said, all right, I'm not going to get up from this desk until I have some ideas about this. There's a process of critical thinking, but ultimately what it comes down to is what can I recognize as the possible benefits that my work might offer someone who has fill in the blank, diabetes, Guillain-Barré, whatever.
Yeah.
What are the risks that could happen if I'm careless? And if you can fill in those two questions, and in order to fill in those two questions, you need to have some kind of understanding about these conditions and what it means to live with them. Right. And that's where you get started. And that's why when I discuss these in the book, I invest, and when in my classes as well, I invest a fair amount of time and energy in talking about pathophysiology. In other words, how does this condition change how you function? Right? Because if you can understand that SARS-CoV-2 is this virus that attacks it usually for most people begins in the respiratory system. Then from that, you can understand about the coughing and the pneumonia and the scarring and, the other things that we see, the other serious consequences that we see of this. In other words, you can understand how the process, the condition, which doesn't have to be a disease, a sprained ankle is not a disease. But if you understand about torn ligaments and inflammation and swelling,
right,
you understand how that process creates the signs and symptoms. If the signs and symptoms are there by themselves and you don't know what led to them, you don't know if you can be safe, because a person could have a swollen foot, say from a sprained ankle, or from congestive heart failure. Two really different decision-making processes, right? Yeah. So I like for people to be able to get a grip on. We like analogies about touching, right? So to grasp or to be able to get a grip on pathophysiology in terms of how it creates these signs and symptoms, because that's what allows us to figure out if our work can be safe. So can you figure out a safe way to work with someone who has a sprained ankle? Well, that sprained, they're not catching. You're not going to spread them.
Right.
If you're not going to spread it from the right foot to the left foot.
Yes.
Right. What's the worst thing you could do? You could make the swelling and the pain worse. What's the best thing you could do? You could help the rest of the body feel great. And you might, if you have the right kinds of skills, be able to help with some of the edema and the pain, depending on, and what you do to do that will depend on the stage at which they present. Right. Because if it's brand new, that's one thing. And if it's 2 weeks old, that's different strategies. So that's the critical thinking process, right? Is it has to begin with what the client wants. And then through that, we look at risks and benefits. And if you can figure out what's the most important thing to figure out is what's the worst thing that could happen if I'm really careless? And what's the best thing that can happen if I'm really skilled? Yeah. And how can I create a session that eradicates the risks and maximizes the benefits? Sometimes we can't. If someone has a contagious disease and we don't know what it was, for instance, in the early days of COVID, and we didn't know how it spreads, and we didn't know how dangerous it was, and we didn't know if it would be safe and appropriate to be even in the same room with someone who has this condition, my advice was we're stepping away for a little while now, because we just don't have enough information to do that critical thinking.
Right. Yeah. You can't, you could try to compare it to something that's similar, but we didn't know. Nobody really knew.
Right. And and in those early days, we got some things wrong. Fortunately, mostly in that we erred on the side of being overly conservative rather than too risky, which is always, if you have to do one or the other, it's better to be too conservative.
Exactly.
But if outside of COVID, let's say you have someone with a disease that you've never heard of before. What was I doing? I was doing some kind of named thing recently. I don't remember, but Marfan syndrome. Okay, so I just did a podcast on Marfan syndrome, and it's a genetic disorder. And let's say you have a client who comes in and says, "I have Marfan syndrome. Can I please receive massage?" What are you going to do? Well, you run to Google and you look up Marfan syndrome, and you see it's a genetic disorder of connective tissues, and it means a number of different things. One of them is that people can have really weak aortas. So when we go back to our client, we're going to say, "Tell me about your cardiovascular health and your activities of daily living," right? Because that's going to give us some ideas about safety.
Right.
But truly, and what I said in your class, I can tell you verbatim, because I say this all the time. I did all this work so you don't have to, right, to gather all this information. But remember, theater major, right? Yeah. Not a scientist.
Yeah.
And I can do it. If I can go to Google and look up Marfan syndrome and figure out, all right, here are some parameters about safety. Anybody can do this. They don't, I'm not the arbiter. It's just critical thinking. I'll be happy to map out, and I do map out for you the steps in which that decision-making process happens.
Yes. Which I do love in your textbook, that you do go through the different the different systems and talk a little bit about the actual ins and outs and the Abmp of the system. So that it's not just a book like, here, do or don't do this for this condition. It's getting you to get some of that critical thinking skills and apply it, and to understand why we say it may be beneficial or may not, or that kind of thing, because you have more of an understanding of the system itself.
Well, there's for sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But also, I cannot possibly predict what your massage looks like.
Right.
So I can't say it's safe for you to work, for you, Michelle, to work with this person. But it, because I don't know what kind of work you do. And if you do like super duper rock'em sock'em sports massage, that's awesome for a lot of clients and less awesome for some clients. And I can't predict that.
Yeah.
So all I can do is say, here are some safety parameters, and your job, although I'm beginning to provide more guidance on this, but when it comes to identifying risks and benefits, now you need to figure out what are the appropriate accommodations, to make.
Right. Yeah.
And
Have you ever heard of a story of somebody saying how reading your guidelines helped them to avoid a situation or something that really came back to them that they were like so grateful to have it for at their fingertips?
I do get that kind of story, and I love it. I actually have a little file in my email of little things like that, because every now and then I need a little boost, and so I'll go and say, I did something really good.
Got a lot of pressure on your shoulders, that's for sure. Yeah. Sometimes. And that's what you mentioned COVID earlier, and I was saying how I wanted to ask you about this when we were having our pre-live chat, and how from where I'm sitting as an education director for a 4-campus school, and we started this pandemic, and everyone was panicking, of course, panicking, and nobody knew what we were doing, and they're all looking to us like, well, you need to have the answers. Like, why don't you know what we're doing? How am I going to get my education? And how are you going to make this up to me? And what's going to happen? And all these questions coming at me. And then I see on social media, I keep seeing people not complain. I don't want to, because everyone was in a place where we're very, very worried and nobody knew what was going on. But a lot of things going down on like the associations and the boards of massage therapy. Why don't they have the answers? And why aren't they telling us what to do? And I could only imagine what was going in your head and coming at you at that time, because I could only imagine that there were people asking you for, please, Ruth, tell us what is the answer? How do we move forward? And so can you speak to that a little? And was that truthful, a little bit of what my imagination was in the situation?
Well, yeah.
Short answer.
But not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, one of the things that has protected me personally is that I am absolutely 100% happy to say when I got something wrong. Right. And I also am very careful about when I say something, first of all, I almost never use the word should. It's kind of unusual for me to do that.
Yeah.
When I do that, I provide my thinking behind that. Right. So I'm pretty good about making sure I have backup. Yeah. But for instance, at the very beginning, like in late February, over a year ago, I was asked by a school owner in California to just write up half a dozen bullet points that might provide a little bit of guidance, because we had no idea what we were dealing with. And I remember this because I was on the road. It was the last trip I took. I was on the road. I was in Chicago, and I spent an evening writing something up, and it ended up being much more complex and longer and more fuller than I had anticipated. And consequently, I sent what I did to Joe Bob, and then I also published the rest as a Facebook post. And in it, there's things about wearing gloves when you're handling things that lots of other people have touched, and little things like that. But basically saying, if we are just really cautious about our hygienic precautions, let's just increase our awareness. Keep your chin up. We'll be okay. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, I published another one that said, I was wrong. Ignore what I said. Shut everything down. Yeah. And I did that. I'd love to say I finally came to that conclusion on my own. I didn't. I mean, I did it because some people I really respect and admire shut down their practices and made really compelling arguments for why that seemed necessary to them. And partly it's because they were living in big cities and they were surrounded by it. And here's the thing is I'm not in practice. I haven't been in a really long time. I didn't like it very much when I was. I'm much, happier teaching and writing. So I don't have the face-to-face interactions that other people have. I don't live my life with that kind of intimacy with a lot of different bodies. And that's one factor. And the other factor is I live in a tiny little town, and across the street from me is, 7 or 8 miles of unbroken beach. And so my ability to, I don't feel crowded. Right. One of the people I was, have continued to be in touch with since the very early days of this, lives in New York City, and on her street were the refrigerator trucks that were holding the extra bodies because they couldn't move them out of the hospitals fast enough. I mean, that's trauma every time you step outside your door. Yeah. And I remember we had a Zoom call shortly after the shut everything down post came out. And she was in tears, and she said, "I think you saved lives." And that was a moment that was really surprising to me because I don't think anyone should take me that seriously. But I also, because I try to do a good job, I don't always get it right, obviously. But I figure that part of my job is to stay on top of this and be a resource for reliable information with the understanding that reliable information changes. Right. Yeah. And so when I say something because that's what the data says, that's because that's what the data says. Yeah. That might change. And people have been really supportive of that process. I mean, I ran into a lot of the main friction I got in those early days was a stance that I was willing to take that some other people, it was sort of a hill I was willing to die on that other people didn't want to approach, which was that I said out loud, and I'll say it again, I have a hard time seeing massage therapy as an essential service in the same way that first responders are providing essential service and nurses and doctors are providing essential service. And, in those early days when everybody was terrified, couldn't get a mask and they were wearing garbage bags instead of protective clothing. Yeah. And I saw massage therapists talk about where they scored their masks. I was like, dude, I can't get on board with that. There are other people whose work is more important than ours. And to say that massage isn't essential is not to say that it's not important. Right. It is important. Absolutely. But it's not most people are not going to die because they didn't get a massage, but they might die because their caregiver was unable to get a fresh mask. Right. Yeah. And so that's the level of, can you guys, can you even remember a year ago when everybody was worried about not having enough PPP? Yeah. And so I got some pushback on that. People were upset with that approach. I get some pushback now because I'm pro-vaccine. Yeah. That's always going to be an issue with everybody. It is. And that's a fight I'm not willing to engage in. That's okay. You do you. There's a difference between being anti-vax and vaccine hesitant, and I get that. And people who are concerned and wanting and looking and saying, I don't really want to be in the beta test for this. Right. I understand that. And yet, I get my second dose a week from today. It's a week from today, and I'm like, bring on the fever. Bring on the fever. So. My husband just got his second yesterday, so I keep texting him all day today. He's doing okay. Yeah, I had my second mine last did not week. Have a reaction, so that's good. Yeah, I had one day, wasn't so bad, but that's the thing. I kind of feel I'm with you on that, and I was on the same boat. I was in that beta test question mark boat, so I get it all the way. But like you said, you do you, right? And this is the information I'm using for me and for my family and what works, and but I can imagine and we all have different risk factors, right? I mean, if you were living with someone who was not a good candidate to get the vaccine, maybe because they've had a history of anaphylactic shock with vaccines or something like that, then your responsibility to that person is a little bit different than me. And I live with one other person and he's been vaccinated, and I don't have to, I never have to get closer than 6 feet to anybody. So
and you like it that way. Yeah. I've seen the beach pictures. It looks gorgeous. So nice. So from those first days of this is a good, probably a good example with COVID is seeing the changes that maybe has been pulled out from the literature and the research based on what we can or can't do. And where do you get that information mostly, and how are you keeping your finger on that pulse for things that changes? And is it different for COVID versus something like new research in diabetes or new research in, sprains, and how to, are we icing it again or are we not? I don't know.
Oh my God.
I feel like I can't keep up with that. Are we icing or no?
You ice if it feels good. How's that? Ice if it feels good.
That's kind of my thing. I
don't ice it for too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't burn your skin. Have a barrier. You're good to go. Yeah. So is that the same process then for you? Like, or for us, I should say, because I hesitate. I keep trying to not say like putting this all on. You're the one that's leading us all, but you are also guiding us on how we can be educated ourselves too. So is that the same process for being on top of that information?
Sure. I'll share a little bit of it. I mean, so I have the privilege that that I'm not in practice, and I'm not at this moment writing a book, which means, my job every day I come up to my computer and I sit down, and frankly, my professional life doesn't look that different than the before times, except that I'm not traveling. And usually spring is spring I'm on the road. So I come up and I do, and the things I work on are writing columns for Massage and Bodywork and working on my podcast, which we can talk about. And now instead of going on the road, I'm writing and recording and then editing webinars. But what this means is I get to invest a fair amount of my professional life into learning and staying on top of the COVID situation. And not everybody has that freedom.
Right.
So, and I do that in a few different ways. And among them, I read the news. The basic news is not a great sort of primary resource for that. I sort of hesitate to say this because it sounds trivial, but it's not trivial. There are a few scientists that I follow on Twitter. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding and Bob Wachter and a couple of others. And when they post an article that says, look, this is really important, they're speaking both to the general public, but also to other, these are mainly infectious disease doctors. Okay. And so those are the ones that I flag and pay attention to. There's a podcast I love called In the Bubble. Okay. And it was originated by a guy named Andy Slavitt, who is now running the Biden COVID response team. And now it's run by another doctor, Dr. Bob Wachter, and it's interviews mainly with infectious disease specialists, vaccinologists, virologists, and policymakers, which I love because this is, this helps us track the science to the recommendations. Right. So, he had an interview with Rochelle Walensky, who's the new head of the CDC, and Dr. Fauci's been on a few, So, a podcast is a pretty painless way to take in some of this information because you can do it while you're walking on the beach, or you can do it while you're folding your laundry, or you don't have to sit down and be reading a lot of hard stuff. And these guys these people are friendly and they're human, and it helps. Then you can go and look at the articles or whatever that it is that they're talking about to make a little more sense out of it. Right. But I have really, really appreciated that. So, and then there's a wonderful Facebook group, Massage and Body, COVID and Massage and Bodywork, Massage and Bodywork and COVID. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact name, but if you were to look for it, you would find it. And this is a very carefully curated resource for information. In fact, the woman who's now the main administrator is the one who lives in New York and was on the street with the refrigerated trucks. Her name is Julie Tudor. And people who are sort of sciencey and a little geeky will post things there that have to be well referenced and well resourced.
Okay.
There was a really fun article up there yesterday, for instance, about the mRNA vaccines and how this platform has been in development for decades. The rolling it out for COVID has been the first time it's been used on a large scale, but the technology isn't it's new in the grand scheme of things. It's not new in the scientific world scheme because it's been in development for a long time. But the platform is now showing promise, and they are now in I think Group A testing as an HIV vaccine.
Wow.
Right? And so, I mean, that's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So,
go science.
Yay science. And that could change an awful lot about the way we manage these other contagious diseases, right?
Yeah.
So, and it might not go anywhere, right? It might not be successful, and we have to be prepared for that. But because we have this platform that is pretty malleable, that we can change to fit what we need, it's opening other kinds of doors. Anyway, that's the kind of thing you'll stumble on in this. Which
I have it here. Chloe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Massage health practitioners and COVID-19. Thank you,
and it's you have to. I'm not sure it's an open group. But as long as you are not bringing the scams and not bringing the what's the word, the conspiracy theories,
right?
Do you remember in the olden days a year ago where there were all this stuff about putting a blow dryer in your mouth, right? Because heat kills the virus.
That one. Oh my
God.
Yeah.
It was wild. It was, oh my gosh. Yeah, no, there was some nutso crazy pants stuff.
Yeah. It's hard when you're more of a science-based person to understand that the process there sometimes with that. So that's interesting.
I get the resistance. And the thing is about that kind of resistance, or about people who are really, really holding on to the idea that COVID is just flu. There's an emotional component, right? About really, really wanting that to be true.
Yeah.
And you can push back against that all you want. It's not going to budge.
Right.
So all we can do is be gentle and say, yeah, I see where you might think that. And yet, here's what the stats are about excess death rates and testing and and so on.
Yeah. You got things to back it up. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. We're not making stuff up.
Yeah. No. I'm interested to see what happens even in the next year or so when we see more, because that's also the data is not out for that yet. What are the really long-term effects for people who have had COVID and that kind?
Do we think that's
do we think that's going to be even more? Are we going to find out more information on that, or do we think like we got a pretty good I'm in there with all the people. No,
we don't have a clue.
Right.
And there's not agreement about what long COVID means. And it appears to be taking sort of two shapes, at least so far. And I'm just, this is just me and my observations. So don't hold me to this.
Yeah.
But if I were to have to create something about long COVID today, and I'm not, because I've been delaying until we have some more information.
Right.
But I would say there's long COVID that looks a lot like fibro and chronic fatigue, in the sense of general aches, fatigue, and more than anything, sort of fogginess and low stamina, right? And there's long COVID that's more physiologic, in the sense of long-term lung damage, long-term heart damage. Some people experienced a sudden onset of diabetes because the virus can attack the kidneys. And that might not resolve. That, all of those things can be permanent. And while we look for those worst case scenarios among people who had really serious infections, sometimes it's not just people who had really serious infections. Sometimes we're seeing this in people who had pretty mild infections, including children. And that bothers me because, we have this idea that COVID doesn't affect, well, we have a completely misstated idea that COVID doesn't affect children. That's incorrect. Children can certainly carry it and children can develop it, but they usually, the statistics say, this is an accurate statement, children have it in a less severe form. Children are much less often hospitalized. However, what we don't know yet is whether children are, have the risk for long-term consequences. In the realm of heart damage, there's a thing called MIS-C, multiple inflammatory syndrome in children. It's like Kawasaki disease, and it can lead to heart damage. And I'm hearing whispers about lung damage in kids. And so, here we are getting ready to reopen the schools. And, with the assumption that teachers are vaccinated and kids don't get terribly sick.
Yeah.
Can we check in on that in 10 years? Right? So
only time's going to tell, that's for sure.
We can peek ahead. So I'm not ready to say anything really definitive about long COVID. I'm getting more and more questions about it. And I expect that by the end of summer, I will have to produce something, a webinar, an article, something. But here's what I predict. What I predict will say, here's what we observe now. And, we still don't know. So
and then stay tuned for the next version of it later.
Yeah, exactly. But I do. Oh, and there's another resource for people who either, for our listeners or whoever's here on YouTube and Facebook and whatever, who either have lived with COVID and are, looking for a community, or for people who are curious about what it was like to have COVID because they want to be of better service to clients who have had it. And that's a Facebook group called Survivor Corps. Now, there are several Facebook groups for COVID survivors. This is the one that I have landed on, but that doesn't mean the others aren't good. This is just the one that I happen to have landed on. And what I love about this Facebook group is it's really people talking to people. Like, I have dizziness that I've never had before. Is anyone else having this? And people will say, yep, I have it too. My doctor says it's positional vertigo or whatever. It's a place where people can compare their experiences and have a sense of not being alone.
Yeah.
And, as someone who, thankfully I didn't have COVID, but it helps me to be a good communicator about it, to know a little more about what it's like to have had COVID.
Yeah.
And so this is a resource that I think is, and this is an open group that anybody can join this group and be part of it. You don't have to have been a COVID survivor. And they have created some really nice webinars. They've had interviews with national figures in infection control and whatnot, through Survivor Corps. That's all free. And
nice.
So I think it's a really good resource for people who want to learn more about the experience, or for people who are seeking community about their own experiences, because you'll see there, things that don't turn up in the scientific literature because people are not necessarily getting medical care. That's another thing about long COVID, is not everybody seeks out medical care, and not all doctors are willing to say, yeah, that's a thing. It's a little bit like the early days of fibromyalgia. Right. Or chronic fatigue. And, maybe a good thing that might come out of this is that the medical community might start looking at fibro and chronic fatigue a little more seriously.
Yeah.
Because, we suddenly have 500,000 people who are at risk for this. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's the death rate. Where are we at? 30 million people or more who are at risk for this.
Yeah. So definitely a lot of resources out there for that, and to keep our eye on it, because things are going to change for sure. But some of the other resources that you have available too for other pathologies, not only COVID, which we did mention that through Books of Discovery, which is your current publisher, correct? I'm just going to put the website up there for that. So if anyone, we have the 7th edition now, and there is an addendum for COVID, which might be addendum part 2 at some point, maybe. But
I've been talking with them about updating it because I read it last August. So I would, I just haven't followed up on that yet. Yeah. So what they did was I went to them and said, I would like to write an entry for COVID and make it available to everybody. And so it's a downloadable PDF. You do not need to own the book to access this PDF. It can be a little hard to find on booksofdiscovery.com. So if you don't mind, I will just do a little tiny little marketing piece on my website at ruthwerner.com. There is a page. Oh, good. Well, look at you. There is a page on there's a subpage on my website specifically for COVID-related resources. And there's a link to the addendum on that page.
Great. Perfect.
It's just a little easier to find there.
Yeah, that's great. It's nice that you have your name easy to remember the website there, but there it is for anyone who wants to follow.
That was just good luck. Yeah.
Yeah. But we also, I've listened to a bunch of the podcasts that I believe they're through Abmp, right? That's right. Through them. And it's, I have a client who, right? It's the name of it. Yes. So I love those. And I love hearing the stories of all the different conditions that, I think we talk a lot of COVID, but there's still a lot of things that people are dealing with and trying to navigate in their practices for sure. So that's a really kind of fun way to chat about them and learn about them a little bit as well. And then on your website too, you have the links to a bunch of the articles that you've published in the past, and also the link that goes directly to Abmp, which has the Massage and Bodywork magazine, which you had mentioned before too. So a lot of those articles as well. And I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're not an Abmp member, can people still search the archives for that on the website?
Yeah. That's the great thing is, here's the last edition of Massage and Bodywork. They make a beautiful magazine. And if you want the hard copy, you need to be a member, but they make the electronic copy available to everybody. They will harvest your email address, and that's the sum total that you need to give them. Yeah. And then anybody, anybody can get to the electronic versions. And I am really blown away by well, first of all, they make me look like a genius. They just do such a beautiful job with the production of my stuff, but they do that with everybody. They get great contributors, and it's just a beautiful magazine. And you do not need to be a member to get it. You don't need to be a member to listen to the podcasts. One member benefit is access to, I have an app with them. It's
the Pocket Pathologies. Yes.
Pocket Pathology. Yeah. And you do need to be a member for that. And that's just a little app for quick reference guide. Right. And then they offer a lot of continuing education, including some things that I've done as part of their member benefits. But but if you're not a member, you can still get to this great stuff. And also they, all the blogs. So they just published a blog that I wrote a couple of days ago on the variants, on the the UK variant and the South African and the Brazilian, and now a couple from California. So there's a new there's a new blog post on the viral variants, and whenever this come out, I always post them on my personal Facebook page and my business one, which is just Ruth Werner's Pathology page.
Right. Yeah. Which, if they go to your website, they're going to be able to find all the links to all of that.
All that stuff.
As they go. So it's so much easier. Just go to ruthwerner.com and start from there and go to everything else. But yeah, I do, when we're here at school with our students, we have a class here at ASIS that it's called case studies, and they take a condition. Usually it's a person they know, condition that they've been trying to work with, or a population they want to work with when they graduate. And we want them to follow that person throughout their whole time while they're here, document changes, they do a presentation, a paper they submit. And one of the things they have to put in there is research based on what conditions we're working with. And so, when you tell a student or someone who doesn't really know how to first look for research or understand what they're looking at when they see things, I say go to the Abmp, go into the archives, look in the search engine, see if you find something related to that. Then you have an article that breaks it down. We find a lot of your articles based on it, or other authors as well. And I love at the end of the article, there's the link, or there's the summary of all of the research that was used to write that article. And I'm like, now you're working that. Now go look at those articles, and that can help you look instead of just starting from the beginning. Find someone who kind of put it together for you, and then go from there.
Well, and I would point you then also to the textbook. There is a bibliography. It's thousands of entries, and it is available online. It's in the online resources for the book. And so your student who has a client who has diabetes or gallstones or whatever can go to the bibliography that's online, and those are exactly the same things. It's always the same places that I start when I'm beginning to gather information. And there's also a research literacy appendix online with the online resources. And so if people are struggling to learn how to read a research paper, that's a good place to start. And of course, there's so many resources at the Massage Therapy Foundation. So.
Right. Yes. We always direct them to that area. Right. That's one of the first links I give them all the time is start here and then read this and do this. Because it is daunting. There's so much out there. Yeah. I said, you just take the pieces and then we'll help you expand on that and learn from it. And the things they come up with, I'm really impressed with these two. I know they're my birds, as we were talking about, our little birds.
Little birds.
And I'm kind of, I've got my own little connection to them, but the projects that they come up with is amazing, and it's a lot to do with the research that's out there that's helping them guide them as well.
Beautiful.
So, it's really great. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun.
Well, tell them I said hi.
I will. I know. I'm gonna have to have them to watch this. I told a few the students, and they're like, "Ooh, that's fancy." So,
well, here's another thing. And this will be my next little email to my mailing list is going to talk about this too. Is I am perfectly happy if we have people here from schools to visit your school via Zoom or Skype. We can put aside a little time and we can play Stump the Pathology Teacher or talk about what's coming up in student clinic or I can present on a topic. But I don't get in front of students anymore right now.
Right.
And so I would love to visit your school anytime that it's convenient. So
that's lovely. Yeah, we have just dedicated like study hall times, and we change them into specific ones. Like today's study hall, we'll talk about kinesiology stuff and that kind of thing. So we'd love to explore that a little bit more for sure. That would be great. Yay. Well, I know I've taken a lot of your time today. We're nearing about our hour-ish. I couldn't believe it. That goes by so fast now. When I first started doing this stream, I know. I mean, the first stream I did, I was trying to stretch it out to 30 minutes. So right now I'm like, woo, look at us. We're like doing this. I really wanted to thank you for taking the time out today to talk with us. I wanted to finish up with a few of those fun questions that I ask all of our guests. Right. Unless there was anything in addition that we missed to talk about that you wanted to plug or mention at all.
I'd love to plug one little thing, which is that I am beginning just now, a little late to the party, to publish 1 hour online self-paced CE classes, and they are approved by NCB. So the first one, the pilot one, is up, and it's called What's Next? COVID-19 Updates for Massage Therapists. And so in this 1 hour thing, we talk about what we understand and what's new and changing. And then the last bit of it is a pretty detailed sort of critical thinking exercise in going through, I create a fictional client and we go through some of the decision points. And it's, awesome. It's pretty great. The only problem is, it's a little hard to reach. So on my Facebook page, in the section under online CE classes, there's a page for my CE classes. So it's under the online one. I'm trying to get a new banner that will just allow people to get to it directly, and I don't know enough about WordPress to do that. So.
Okay, so on there, ruthwerner.com, start from there and hunt around.
Start from there and go to my CE classes.
So CE classes. Okay. Oh, I'm going to do that after we finish talking. That would be exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun, and it's not very expensive, and it's you can do it in an hour, and it's the feedback on it has been terrific. People have really enjoyed it.
Love it. Thank you. All right, so let's find out some fun things about Miss Ruth Werner here. All right, which talent or superpower would you most like to have?
I would like to be really, really good at free motion quilting, but that's probably not what you're asking about. I would like to be able to swim without breathing. I would like to have gills.
Just keep swimming. Oh, I love it. Oh, I love the water. If you weren't in the massage therapy field or doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing as a career?
I would probably be teaching. I would probably be teaching like in high school and hating it.
And
you know,
I'm glad you're here and loving it instead. Yeah. I'm going to guess I know the answer to this one, but I'll see. Maybe you'll surprise me. If money and circumstances weren't an issue, where would you like to live?
Right here.
Yep.
But I would buy the house in front, the house that's between me and the beach, and I would.
Yeah. Nice.
So there's still enough space.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
a clear sight line.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah. And what is your most treasured possession?
Like a thing, thing you can hold on to.
Yeah. People have answered things with like their pets or their children, but I have seen some interesting books and other things conversation happen. I stumped you.
Quilting machine.
Aha! So beautiful. If some people haven't seen your work, they really need to follow you on Facebook and get to see those. The wonderful ones you donate to the Massage Therapy Foundation and all the other ones I've seen over the years. Just gorgeous. Beautiful.
I'm working on one now that will be a fundraiser for the Alliance for Massage Therapy Education.
Yay!
Yeah, that's pretty.
I just had a membership call yesterday about them. Anyway, we sidetrack. What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, try not to worry about it. Someday your skin really is going to clear up.
I can imagine very, very challenging for an 18-year-old.
I had for years and well into my 20s. So. Yeah, it was a thing that really interfered with my quality of life for sure.
Oh, I'm glad you're here now. I just had Chloe again. I'm gonna have to hire Chloe to be our assistant. Just put that website up for us.
God bless you, Chloe. You are awesome.
Where's this?
Thank you.
And we've had a bunch of thanks from Barbara Dean, Patricia Cole, Tamla Lehman, some of the people who've been watching live and saying hello. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming on live and everyone catching the replay. I hope you were able to get some great information and see all those links come up. Thanks to Chloe, and to get onto those self-paced courses. And again, thank you so much, Ruth, for being here today. And I'm sure we'll chat again. I can't wait to see what's coming next from you.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and big shout out to ASIS and all the great work that you're doing for the profession through what you're doing with these terrific schools. And hey, everybody, go to my website, get on the mailing list. I don't bug you. You get a couple of paragraphs once every couple of weeks from me. That's pretty much it. So,
that's awesome.
And
there it is again on the website.
This was totally fun. So, and we didn't get too salty, so that was okay.
No. All right. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time. See you next Friday.